At first, every man believes in the story. He believes love will redeem him. That beauty is proof of goodness. That intimacy equals understanding. It's not stupidity, it's human. It's the natural optimism of youth, the dream that somewhere in the chaos of life, another soul will complete what feels missing. But every man who truly lives, truly risks, eventually faces the breaking of that illusion. And when that moment comes, it feels like hatred. He sees how easily affection turns to indifference, how quickly devotion becomes manipulation, how love, so sacred in his imagination, can decay into transaction and performance. He thinks he's become cynical, but he hasn't. He's become awake. Schopenhauer called this awakening the sobering of the will, the moment a man stops confusing nature's trick for divine purpose. Because behind every romantic illusion lies a biological command to continue the species, not to fulfill the soul. What we call love is, in his words, the will to life, the blind force of reproduction masquerading as poetry. And the tragedy of man is that he mistakes the whisper of instinct for the voice of destiny. When that mask falls, disillusionment hits like a winter storm. You stop believing in the myth of perfect women, perfect love, perfect understanding. You stop believing that devotion guarantees loyalty, or that purity exists untouched by instinct. And in that moment, a quiet bitterness seeps in. Not because you hate women, but because you finally see them. You see the contradictions, the instincts, the shift in emotions, all the human flaws you once refused to notice. You see that your love was never selfless. It was a kind of worship. You made her the mirror of everything divine you wanted to believe in. And when that mirror breaks, you don't just lose her. You lose the illusion of meaning she carried. That's why heartbreak cuts so deep. It isn't just emotional loss. It's philosophical death, the collapse of a worldview. But Schopenhauer would tell you, this death is necessary, because only through it can you outgrow illusion. Only through it can you mature into clarity. The man who has never been disillusioned will always remain a child, chasing fantasy after fantasy, woman after woman, projecting divinity onto biology. But the man who endures the death of naivete begins to see life as it is. And though that vision feels cold, it's the first glimpse of freedom. Because when illusion dies, truth is born. And truth, even when it wounds, is the only thing that can set a man free from his own delusion. So no, you don't hate women. You've simply lost the ability to lie to yourself about them. And that loss, while painful, is the beginning of wisdom. Every man, at some point in his life, confuses instinct with destiny. He meets a woman, feels that magnetic pull, that almost spiritual intoxication, and believes it must mean something profound. He calls it love. He calls it connection. He calls it fate. But Schopenhauer stripped that illusion bare. He said what most men are too afraid to admit, that what we call love is nature's bait, a biological hypnosis designed not to bring us happiness, but to ensure reproduction. The purpose isn't romance, it's continuation. Nature uses beauty, tenderness, and attraction as tools. It paints the mask of soulmates over the machinery of survival. When a man falls in love, he thinks he's seeing the divine, but what he's actually seeing is the projection of his own longing. He isn't in love with her. He's in love with what she represents: youth, vitality, innocence, completion. That's why men often fall hardest, not for the woman herself, but for the image they build around her. They take fragments, her voice, her smile, her softness, and assemble them into a fantasy. And the more idealistic the man, the stronger the illusion, because the man who sees life through ideals is easy to deceive. He mistakes chemistry for meaning, lust for destiny, biology for metaphysics. He sees her as a goddess when she's simply human. Schopenhauer warned that this illusion is nature's cruelest trick, because once the spell fades, once desire burns out and instinct completes its purpose, the truth emerges. The divine becomes ordinary. The goddess becomes a person with flaws, moods, and contradictions. And that's when men feel betrayed. Not because women lied, but because nature did. You start to see it everywhere. The endless emotional shifts, the contradictions between what women say and what they do, the way affection can turn to disdain with frightening speed. You see that what you called mystery is often just emotional volatility. What you called intuition is often self-interest wrapped in charm. What you called connection is often chemistry mistaking itself for truth. But this realization doesn't have to lead to hatred. It can lead to understanding. Because women, too, are captives of this illusion. They also mistake instinct for love. They also chase the ideal, security, protection, validation, believing it to be transcendence. Both sexes are puppets of the same biological will. Schopenhauer called it the will to life, the blind drive that commands all creatures to reproduce, to persist, to use whatever deception is necessary to ensure survival. When you see this clearly, the anger fades. You stop moralizing. You stop blaming. You stop expecting human beings to transcend their nature. And that is the beginning of detachment. You realize that what once felt like betrayal was simply biology completing its cycle. That love's collapse isn't tragedy, it's the law of nature playing out. But most men can't handle this truth. They cling to the illusion because it gives them comfort. They'd rather worship than understand. They'd rather suffer in fantasy than accept reality. But the rare man, the Schopenhauerian man, lets the illusion die. He allows the truth to strip him bare. And though that nakedness feels cruel, it also feels clean. Because when illusion dies, resentment dies with it. And once resentment dies, peace begins. There comes a moment when the illusion finally breaks, when the pedestal you built for her crumbles, when the goddess you worship reveals herself to be human, fragile, flawed, self-serving, just like you. For most men, that moment feels like betrayal. But for the few who understand Schopenhauer, it's liberation. Because every illusion eventually demands payment, and the cost of worship is always freedom. You thought she was the meaning of your life. You thought devotion would make her loyal. You thought your love was sacred. But what you were really worshiping wasn't her. It was your own ideal. She was just the canvas. You projected everything divine you wanted to believe in, purity, beauty, goodness, onto her face. And when the mask fell, you mistook the collapse of illusion for the death of love. But love didn't die. Worship did. And that collapse is necessary. Schopenhauer wrote that man is condemned to chase illusions because he confuses the will's cravings for transcendence. He seeks salvation through women, through romance, through the dream of being completed. But every time he reaches out, he finds only nature's machinery behind the poetry. He finally sees the truth, that woman's charm, her tenderness, her allure, all serve the same biological master. And when that truth settles, something within him breaks. But what breaks isn't his heart, it's his blindness. He begins to see how much of his suffering came from his own imagination, how many sleepless nights, jealous thoughts, and desperate gestures were born not from love, but from illusion. And then something strange happens. He stops blaming her. Because hatred is just another form of worship. It means she still has power. But when the illusion collapses fully, there's nothing left to hate. You see her clearly, and in that clarity, the emotional charge dissolves. You no longer need to moralize her behavior. You no longer expect perfection. You no longer seek validation. You no longer demand understanding. You simply see. And what you see is not an angel or a villain, but a human being moved by instinct and emotion, just as you are. This is where cynicism ends and wisdom begins. The bitter man stops at disillusionment. The wise man goes further. He passes through it. He learns to love without worshiping, to desire without kneeling, to connect without surrendering his soul, because he understands that the world doesn't owe him purity. The collapse of worship is the death of fantasy, and from that death, a deeper form of love can be born. A love not based on projection, but on reality. A love without illusion is quieter, rarer, and infinitely more stable. It's not the fire of infatuation, it's the warmth of awareness. Schopenhauer would say that once a man stops being deceived by appearances, he finally becomes capable of compassion. Because only then does he see how blind we all are, chasing our desires, justifying our instincts, mistaking nature's will for divine purpose. He no longer hates women for being what they are. He pities them, as he pities himself for being trapped in the same cosmic joke. And that pity, paradoxically, gives birth to peace. So if your illusion has collapsed, if you've seen through the mask and felt the disappointment, it's not the end of love, it's the beginning of seeing. You haven't lost your heart, you've simply reclaimed it from fantasy. When the illusion dies, most men panic. They rush to fill the void with new women, new distractions, new addictions, anything to escape the silence that follows truth. But the rare man doesn't run. He allows the silence to expand. He sits with the emptiness that used to be romance and realizes it's not emptiness, it's space. Space once occupied by fantasy, by worship, by need. Space that is now free. This is the moment Schopenhauer called resignation, not defeat, but release. The man who reaches this stage has stopped bargaining with the world. He no longer expects fulfillment from what was never meant to satisfy the soul. He understands that the peace he was chasing through women, through love, through devotion, was never out there. It was within. And in that realization, something extraordinary happens. Emotional withdrawal becomes freedom. Because what we call detachment is not coldness. It's clarity. It's the ability to feel without being enslaved by feeling. To desire without mistaken desire for destiny. To love without losing your sovereignty. You stop performing. You stop apologizing. You stop trying to earn what cannot be earned. You no longer need women to mirror your worth back to you because you finally looked inward and seen it yourself. This is why Schopenhauer's philosophy, though bleak on the surface, leads to strength. He stripped man of illusions not to make him bitter, but to make him untouchable. The man who sees through nature's game can no longer be manipulated by it. He may still enjoy beauty, but he no longer kneels before it. He may still feel affection, but he no longer mistakes it for salvation. He may still connect, but never at the cost of his freedom. That is real mastery, not of women, but of the self. Because the man who no longer believes that happiness depends on another person becomes the most dangerous kind of man. Calm. You can't guilt him. You can't tempt him. You can't control him. His emotions serve him, not the other way around. He no longer oscillates between obsession and disappointment because he no longer worships what's fleeting. He no longer searches for eternal meaning in temporary pleasure. And for the first time, he feels peace. Not the emotional high of passion, but the stillness of understanding. Schopenhauer saw this as a kind of enlightenment, the moment when the will, exhausted by chasing, finally rests, the moment when desire loses its grip, and the man becomes an observer of life rather than a victim of it. It's not indifference, it's transcendence. You don't stop feeling. You start feeling rightly. You no longer cling to what fades, nor curse it when it goes. You begin to appreciate the beauty of impermanence. This is the paradox of emotional withdrawal. It feels like loss, but it's liberation. Because what you lose is illusion. What you gain is power. And that power, the calm, detached strength of a man who has nothing to prove, is what modern men mistake for cynicism. But it isn't cynicism, it's maturity. It's what happens when the fire of youthful longing burns away, leaving behind the steady glow of understanding. You don't hate women. You simply stopped hallucinating. You see life clearly now, not as a fairy tale, but as a mirror reflecting your own desires back at you. And once you see that, you can finally choose how to live, free from illusion, free from dependency, free from the endless repetition of the same mistakes disguised as love. That's the peace Schopenhauer wanted you to find. Not joy, not bliss, but serenity born from truth. And once you taste that serenity, you'll never trade it for illusion again. Once you've passed through disillusionment, you arrive somewhere new, a quiet plateau beyond bitterness. You no longer worship, but you also no longer resent. You've gone beyond the extremes of idealization and hatred. What remains is clarity. Schopenhauer called this the purification of the will, the rare state in which man no longer lives as a slave to desire, but as a witness to it. He still feels attraction, affection, even love, but now he recognizes them as movements of nature, not commandments of fate. This is what maturity looks like: understanding without illusion, compassion without naivety, love without bondage. When you see women clearly, you stop oscillating between obsession and disgust. You stop swinging between worship and contempt. You understand that the same beauty that once enslaved you is part of nature's design. Nothing to fear, nothing to hate. The young man wants to possess women. The wounded man wants to avoid them. But the awakened man neither clings nor runs. He can enjoy connection without losing himself, precisely because he expects nothing mystical from it. He no longer needs her to complete him. He no longer needs to be adored to feel alive. And because of that, paradoxically, he becomes the kind of man women respect most: self-contained, balanced, at peace. You see, Schopenhauer wasn't teaching men to despise life or women. He was teaching them to see through the illusions that make life and love so painful. Once you understand that desire is just the will's trick, you stop being a puppet to it. And when you stop being a puppet, you start to act freely. This is the return of balance, when your heart no longer drags you into chaos, and your reason no longer kills your heart. When emotion serves wisdom, not the other way around. You can still love, but without delusion. You can still desire, but without dependence. You can still give, but without losing your center. The man who has outgrown illusion doesn't hate women. He simply doesn't expect them to be what they're not. He accepts their nature the way he accepts his own: imperfect, instinctive, contradictory, human. And that acceptance is what true peace feels like. It's not withdrawal from life. It's re-entry into it with clear eyes. You can laugh again. You can love again. You can appreciate beauty without mistaking it for eternity. You can enjoy connection without losing your freedom. That is what it means to outgrow illusion. It's not detachment from the world. It's harmony with it. You stop demanding permanence from the impermanent. You stop mistaking emotion for meaning. You begin to live like a philosopher in a world of dreamers. And to those still caught in illusion, your peace will look like coldness. Your calm will look like arrogance. Your clarity will look like distance. But that's only because they haven't seen what you've seen. Once you've glimpsed the machinery behind the mask, you can never worship the mask again. But you can smile at it. You can even love it for what it is, not for what you wish it to be. This is the essence of Schopenhauer's wisdom, that peace is not found in possession, but in perception. The man who no longer chases illusions finally becomes himself. So if you've been called cynical, heartless, detached, don't defend yourself. You're not bitter, you're awake. You don't hate women. You've simply stopped dreaming. And now, for the first time, you are capable of something deeper than love: understanding. If this truth resonates with you, write in the comments, "I've outgrown illusion." Share this with a man who's still suffering from the death of his fantasy. He needs to know it isn't the end. It's the beginning of freedom. And in our next video, we'll go further into this path with Why Letting Go of Desire Makes You Powerful, Schopenhauer. Stay detached, stay clear, Stay free,